Já a seguir no podcast do Chris Hope, Choppers Political Podcast.
I know that it's only you, your mum, and a couple of others that listen to this. Well, up.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip, news and stories from our studio here at GB News in the heart of Westminster. This week, America's Liberation Day happened.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
That's right, US President Donald Trump slapped tariffs of up to 34% on countries around the globe.
So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less, so how can anybody be upset?
And we in the UK, apparently America's special friend, were hit with a 10% charge on our exports to the US. For cars, it was 25%. So Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has been scrambling about how to respond. For Brexiteers, the news has justified leaving the European Union, whose member states are now carrying a 20% tariff, twice the UK's. So today I'm discussing just that. Do Trump's tariffs justify the UK's decision to leave the EU in 2016, and how should we respond? With João Vale de Almeida, the former EU ambassador to the UK and the USA, and later with Mr. Brexit himself, Nigel Farage, who devoted his life to leaving the European Union and is now the leader of Reform UK. And later, in the week after the spring statement, I'll be speaking to Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, about what tariffs mean for the UK and what he thinks of Rachel Reeves. But first, to tariffs and Brexit, and to João Vale de Almeida, the European ambassador to the UK from 2015 to 2019, and before that, the EU ambassador to the US from 2010 to 2014. João, welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thank you for hosting me.
Great to see you in London. Above our basement, our dungeon, the sun is shining because it hasn't gone in since Brexit Day, as you know.
Absolutely, I think
It's always sunny.
Brexit weather dividend, right?
That's the difference.
Well, it happens we have the same in Portugal, and we are still in the EU. So.
You're better weather.
But I leave it to you too.
Sod that up. But there are clouds over the economic future of so many countries around the globe after last night's news. We're talking on Thursday morning, of course. What would you do now if you were advising Ursula von der Leyen?
I will tell her to stay cool, but stay firm, and react in a smart way. Our purpose should be to go back to where we were before in terms of not escalating a tariff war. But if that is what the US wants, we'll have to play. We'll have to play again. But I think first objective, let's talk and let's try to scale things down. If that doesn't work, I think we'll have to respond in a robust way.
And everything gets more expensive for people paying for these imports.
It's bad for everyone. It's bad for everyone. There's no rationale for going back to the 19th century in terms of erecting barriers. I mean, our economy is totally globalized, interconnected. I was saying the other day, an airplane, has 18,000 suppliers.
Yes.
Right? And this...
Spain, Toulouse, and
the parts
UK.
Cross the Atlantic. They cross
The
the Channel. They cross the Channel, but they also cross the Atlantic. Maybe they cross the Pacific as well. That's how we organize the economy with enormous efficiency gains, benefiting consumers. I mean, there were some downsides, and I understand where Mr. Trump comes from, because we lost some jobs in some of parts of our territory. Maybe we were neglecting those downsides for too long, and certainly we need to do something about it, and we are trying to do in the EU, and I know you're trying to do here, but the solution is certainly not to create problems for everyone, to risk recession, inflation, and all that.
He's a man in a hurry, isn't he? I think he's got basically 2 years before he's a lame duck president, because after 2 years, they start selecting a successor to fight the next election.
Well, what I learned, what I learned in the US is that this country has, let's say, an isolationist kind of dimension that, pops up every now and then, but it's always there. It's a country that feels self-assured, autonomous, protected by two large oceans, by friendly neighbors, very powerful militarily and all. So they think they can go it alone. And from time to time, you have eruptions of protectionism, isolationism. The problem with this particular eruption is that it can have a seismic impact in the world economy, and it does not recognize the specificity of a globalized economy. So I think Mr. Navarro and others were advising Mr. Trump they should go back to business school or economics.
Does he have a point? I mean, he made the policy on the backs of poorer workers, didn't he? In the States, in the Rust Belt states, let's say Detroit, the home of the auto in America, and now it's obviously a complete economic mess at the moment. Is he thinking about those people? Thinking, well, globalization might have worked for you and maybe for me and other people, but for the working class, it doesn't work.
Let's be clear, and I write about it in my book that just came out. It's a pleasure to offer you. You are mentioned there, so I'm going back to the last 25 years and understand how we came to where we are.
Yes,
which I call the divorce of nations.
Yes.
But one of the issues is that we lifted millions of people out of poverty in China, in India, in parts of Asia, in parts of Africa.
with trade,
with globalization, with open trade lanes, with exchanges of technology, open markets, lowering tariffs, not raising tariffs, lowering tariffs. But we also created new poor. Some people explain Brexit partially by some of the impact in the north or northeast of England, for instance. You'll have the same, the Rust Belts in America that maybe elected Donald Trump. So maybe our governments, all of us, neglected those downsides of globalization.
They have votes. They have votes.
Of course, they have votes, and the center right and the center left. Maybe they neglected that for too long. So we are now maybe paying that price. The problem being that, in my view, my personal opinion, but I'm not the only one, this is not the solution for that problem. It can make the life of those people even worse than they have been up to now.
Did you ever meet Donald Trump when you were in America?
I met him at the UN, yeah.
Yeah, and how did you find him? Before he was the president, wasn't it? Before.
Yeah, I met him before, but when he was president, he came to New York. I was already ambassador to the United Nations and not to the US. It impresses everybody. Of course, is a big.
He's got two characters.
He's got the volume, and he's got the voice, and he's got the charisma of a leader. That's without any question. But he's, in my view, at least I felt very much self-centered, very much,
It's about him.
It's about him. It's about his brand. It's about his.
And what's he doing here? Is he being dramatic as a kind of starburst of everyone gets a tariff, and then we or the EU have to negotiate him back to zero?
We have all had experiences with real estate, right? Either buying or selling or whatever. And what does a real estate agent do? It puts the price very high in order to have margin to come down, right? It kind of destabilizes you being a seller or a buyer. So this kind of confrontational tactics that they use, not all Trump is about that. So we need to be smart enough not to reply in the same way. Retaliation has to be balanced. It cannot go sort of escalating even further. So we need to be smarter, but we need to stay cool. In our case, the EU, we need to stay united, and I hope that will be the case. And present alternatives for Trump. I mean, he understands when a deal is there to be taken, right? And I think that's what maybe your government is doing here. I don't know, but
They're trying to negotiate a small.
Yeah, I think so. The problem being that it's not easy to negotiate with America. We have our own experience of trade deals with them. So be careful of what you sign up to and what you wish for. On our side, to come back to your earlier point, we are trying to negotiate out of this something that is better than escalating. But if that is not possible, we are the most important single market in the world. We are a very powerful trade player. We have a very powerful regulatory player as well. Don't forget that. So I think we have a toolbox that is quite impressive. So if it comes down to to that, we are ready to respond.
But with low growth, and it could tip us all into some form of recession.
Yeah, but that's the big problem, and that will affect the whole world because of the interconnection of the economy. So I think this is a watershed moment. Let's be honest, and in my book I explain why it is coming down, and we need to address it in a very serious way. So these are serious moments. So in spite of the good weather, the clouds are in the sky.
Forming. 10% tariffs for the UK, 20% of the European Union. Brexit was a good idea, right?
I'm happy for you. I mean, it didn't spare the car industry.
No, 25%.
You have 25%
slipping.
You have 25% on the car industry, and I also understand that there is an underlying political message from Mr. Trump. I'm not naive to the point of not believing there is a point being made about treating the UK better than the EU, but that's fair enough.
You've written your book, it's called The Divorce of Nations, a diplomat's inside view as the global order collapses. You're one of the most senior diplomats out there, given the roles you've had at the EU, UK and United Nations for the European Union. Of course, you're Portuguese too. Do you think, though, that Brexit is where the world is going? I mean, nationalism, boundaries, sovereignty. Because Brexit was about sovereignty.
Yeah,
you understand.
Yeah, I in the book I call it the mother of all divorces. Yes, in the sense that it encapsulates all the forces and the trends and the tensions that can lead to a divorce of nations. So I have a couple of chapters on Brexit with my own version of events. You were quoted a couple of times, by the way. It's a good example or a bad example of if you don't address some issues that are kind of brewing in your society, you could end up with solutions that maybe are not ideal.
Do you think there might be a Frexit, a Telexit?
No,
Brexit,
I don't think so.
Other countries might away.
If you look at I studied this 25 years. At the beginning of the century, in the year 2000, people in Europe that said that the EU was a good thing for their countries, 40-something%. The latest barometer, 74%, and it increased after Brexit. So I'm not worried about the fact that citizens in Europe think, as the geopolitical tension goes up and now geoeconomic tension, they are absolutely, they have the feeling and the sense that they are better together than if they were separated.
Because the world feels quite an uncertain place.
Absolutely. You have to, that's why I regret Brexit, because that's my position. But I hope we can, let me on this point say something a little bit more positive. I'm hopeful that what we're trying to do now to reset the relationship on defense and security to begin with, because we are forgetting in the last 2 days Mr. Putin and what the kind of threat he represents for us. So I'm very hopeful that we can do a lot on defense and security. I'm hopeful that we can do something on the economic front, even if we keep your red lines. And I don't think, and I hope this will not distract us from that objective, from our bilateral objective of resetting the relationship.
There's a big bilateral coming up between Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, we have a summit in May, and we are hopeful that this will bring, I'm no longer in an official position, I'm expressing personal views, but I hope that this will deliver the right message, and also a message about together trying to redress the international economic situation and reduce the negative impact of what Mr. Trump is trying to do.
So the future of the UK should be closer to the European Union, not inside it. So sovereignty stays apart, but maybe.
I mean, take crime, take immigration. Take defense and security, take energy, for instance, take mobility of young people. I mean, we are sacrificing generations of young British people and young Portuguese, young Spanish people, and, because they are not able to benefit from, experiences across the channel. So I think we should do something about it.
Under 18 to 30, looks like it's on the table, the freedom of movement idea.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. What did you learn from writing your memoirs? Did you go over our conversations and think Chopper was right?
Chopper was absolutely right. Now, it was great. Listen, I recommend that you do this. When you get there, you are too young for it. But, looking at the past, first of all, your memory fails you. Yeah. Be aware. So take notes because, I was discussing with my wife and she was reading, of course. She was the first reader of everything I did. And I said, but you were not there at that moment. I thought, man, absolutely sure. I was there at that. And so memory fails you. And of course, you look at the events in a different perspective. So it's quite a creative process of going back to the past and put things in context.
And any regrets, were there? I mean, given who you've been rubbing shoulders with world leaders for 20 years. I mean, you're an observer to it. You're involved in it. Any things you do different?
No, I'm glad I'm not in politics. It's not a good kind of life to have. But I was very glad to be able to observe, to be on the front seat of some of these events, and it's a privilege. So I thought that I should share.
Yes. Any funny stories in there? Any amusing?
A few, but we have to buy the book. Well, I offer it to you. But our listeners, maybe they could pop up and.
And what happens over the next few weeks? I mean, we're speaking Thursday morning. I was up late last night reporting for GB News about the tariffs. If you were writing a note now for your old bosses in Brussels, what happens? I mean, what's the timescale on response? If we can't get them to walk back in America from the 20% on EU, 10% on UK?
I think we have to calibrate both the timing and the content of the response. The timing, because we don't want to rush to conclusions. We are still digesting what we heard last night, and this list contains very awkward things, by the way, and the press is commenting on that. So we'll have to really see what's the impact of it, what's in it, and what kind of impact. And secondly, we need to be calibrate on the content, because we don't want, whenever you talk about retaliation, sanctions, whatever, it's a two-way street. It hurts you as well. So we need to be very careful about that. So let's be cool. Let's be firm when we reply. But let's most of all try to, reduce the negative impact for all of us of the track that Mr. Trump.
Have you ever known such an uncertain time internationally?
Not on the trade front. But of course, if you combine the trade front with the security front, we are on the divorce is happening, and we should do something about it.
Okay. João Vale Almeida, thank you for joining us today. Your book is out. It's called The Divorce of Nations, A Diplomat's Inside View as a Global Order Collapses by Flint. It's £18.99 in all good shops. In pounds, not euros.
Pounds for the moment.
Thank you for joining us on Shoppers.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.
So, from a Remainer, if you let me call him that, to a Brexiteer. Nigel Farage is a politician most closely associated with Brexit, campaigning all of his life to leave the European Union, and then setting up a party called the Brexit Party to ensure it was delivered back in 2019. He's now leader of Reform UK, and he joins me now. Nigel Farage, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Huge concern about these tariffs. Were they avoidable?
Well, he said he'd put tariffs on. He was elected to do that. And of course, he's put us in the lower tier, the lowest tier. Interestingly, EU 20%, UK 10%. By the way, I'm not pretending 10% is good.
No.
It's just less bad than it would have been without Brexit.
It's all down to you then, because you took
Well,
the EU.
it's something that most of the commentariat can't really see.
Do we owe you a thank you then, Nigel Farage, for getting us out of the European Union and avoiding these tariffs 9 years later?
Well, but I think we should go much further than that. I can tell you this. I sat down face-to-face with Trump in 2017. He said, we want to do a deal with you guys. I want to show the world I believe in trade if it's fair, if it's right, if it's good for both sides. But of course, we didn't do a deal. Why? Because the Conservatives didn't take us out of the European Union. We went through the whole of 2017, 2018, 2019, and on it went. And by the time we'd finally left the European Union, frankly, it was all a bit too late. We did, however, do a lot of negotiation. 2/3 of a deal is there on the table. And it was really interesting to hear Jonathan Reynolds this morning. Because on the one hand, you've got Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union saying, we're going to retaliate. And Jonathan Reynolds saying, no, we're not going to retaliate. We're going to look to ways not just to erase tariffs, but to go further towards a trade deal. And it's very interesting for a Labour government, led by a Prime Minister who wanted a second referendum, they're now actually behaving a bit more like Brexiteers. Fascinating.
Using the powers that Brexit gave them, because it's on them.
Using the powers Brexit gave them on this, and also on foreign policy. When the reason, I mean, like, we can come to Ukraine, and I'm, by the way, very, very cautious about sending British troops on the ground in Ukraine for an undetermined period of time. But even acting as he's trying to do as the bridge between the European members of NATO and America, Brexit has benefited this Prime Minister.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Have you talked to the White House? Are they using you as a back channel? We thought that might happen when he came in, and right now be quite helpful.
What's really interesting is that in the first term, I spoke to the White House quite a lot. In this term, I haven't, because I can't be seen to interfere unless the government wants me to be useful or to be helpful. I have said many times, I don't just know the president, I know half the cabinet.
And you've told Keir Starmer that on the floor of the House. You offered it, buying privately.
I've done it many times. They're choosing to go their own route, and fine. Perhaps they're better qualified than me to do it. I just think that, you know, when it comes to the people holding the big key jobs in economics, I just happen to know these people, happen to be friendly with these people. Look, I repeat the offer. If the government wants me to help, I would help, and I would do it, even though they're a Labour government. I'd do it in the national interest.
There's a 417-page list of products that could be tariffed at 10% proposed by the government this afternoon. What would your response be to where we are now? If you were Prime Minister now, how would you mitigate this hit on our industry?
You'd recognise that in the next week, that isn't going to change, but in the next month or two, it can change. Lots of reasons why. Number one, we are still the biggest foreign investor in America. America is the biggest foreign investor here. We don't trade with America at a massive surplus, unlike Germany and many other countries in the European Union. There are areas like financial services where, frankly, some simplification of the rules could benefit both sides. The biggest argument is over food, but frankly, if things are labelled properly and consumers have the choice, I don't see a massive problem there either, frankly.
That's chicken, and I like chlorinated chicken.
Yeah, but I mean, every bag of salad you buy in any supermarket, any pre-bag salad is chlorine washed anyway. And look, everyone goes apoplectic about chlorine washed chicken. Don't buy it. It's very easy.
Label it.
It's very easy.
It's a labelling issue, really.
It's a labelling issue, it's a consumer choice issue, and a consumer knowledge issue.
On Ukraine, that's a big challenge faced. Putin is normally dominating discussion in Westminster, not today because of tariffs. What's your position on boots on the ground? Would you vote? I mean, there was a vote. We are told there's a vote.
I mean, I'm pretty annoyed that the Prime Minister is reverting to outright lies.
Well, that's a big thing to say.
No. Outright lies, saying that reform fawned over Putin. I've never heard such rubbish.
But that's your remark, saying he's
No. I said in one sentence 12 years ago that I respected him as a leader, but didn't like him as a person and wouldn't live in life.
Strong leader, you said, didn't you?
Yeah, well, there's no questions of what he is. That's why he's been there.
But that's fawning for them, isn't it?
It's almost as if there's no nuance of any kind allowed. You know, has Putin been a successful Russian politician? Well, up until the invasion of Ukraine, arguably yes. I've never liked the guy. We deplore the invasion. The fact the Prime Minister is sinking to these depths, I think, shows you, despite what's happening on the international stage, domestically, this government's become very unpopular very, very quickly. And my nervousness is this. Back in the early 1950s, there was a settlement to end the Korean War. Korea divided North and South with the divide, and the Americans, us to some extent, but the Americans said they put an army in to maintain the peace. 72 years later, there are still 24,000 American troops in Korea. We went into Afghanistan in 2001. Little did we know we'd be there for 20 years. The British Army has been diminished since 2010. It's the smallest it's been for centuries. For every one man in the front line or woman, you need two behind, reserves, etc. So one, I'm worried the army isn't big enough. And two, I want the Prime Minister to tell me, if we send troops in, for how long? And what's the objective?
Just briefly, other areas too. Chagos Islands, that deal has now been approved by the White House, we think, from government source.
Yeah, I mean, the reason the Americans have approved it is because we've said to them, don't worry, guys, we'll pay for all of it. The Americans will not contribute a
And that
penny.
bill is how much again?
So nobody tells the truth on this because nobody understands simple arithmetic. The deal of 90 million a year for 99 years, that's pretty much uncontested, right? Even government doesn't fight back against that. 90 million pounds a year for 99 years linked to inflation. If inflation runs at 3%, and given the way compounding works, that would be a repayment of 52 billion pounds. And frankly, right now,
Well,
when you've taken away the winter fuel allowance, when you're threatening family farms, when the economy and the borrowing figures are in dire trouble, and when you're promising to increase the size of defence spending,
Yes.
why risk this money?
and it's hard to sell, I think, when that figure, they do challenge 90 million a year. We'll see where that ends up, but it'll be a lot of...
Well, I think everyone accepts it's 9 billion.
Nigel Farage, thank you. And finally, it's still not clear where the announcements from Donald Trump leave the government's spring statement and its economic forecast unveiled just last week. Before Trump's announcements on Wednesday night, I caught up with Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. You're best known for Mel's Minute. I mean, you're not even...
Well, a minute with Mel. Let's get it right, Chopper. Minute with Mel.
Because when you were DWP secretary, you started doing these, you were trying to get them back to work and being encouraging, weren't you?
Yeah.
And you were an unlikely star.
Well, I think they worked. You know, I still produce them from time to time, and they are exactly 60 seconds. And I always start by saying, start the clock.
Yeah.
And then it ticks down, you see.
Or we'll start the clock on this podcast, shall we? We won't keep you long because you're very, very busy. How are you finding the opposition?
Well, it's very different government, obviously. I mean, in government, you've got thousands of civil servants running around doing things for you. And you've got the task. Well, I've got James, who is absolutely brilliant. He's worth 20 other people.
You're calling a student.
He's very good. He's absolutely excellent. But look, we've got a big job to do, which is firstly to hold this government to account. And we've obviously had the emergency budget very recently.
Spring
statement, as Labour would say. But look, it was a huge event because what it was trying to fill a hole that Rachel Reeves had already dug because of the choices she took back in the autumn of last year in that budget. She blew all her headroom and £4 billion on top. And that's why we ended up in the situation we are. So there was a lot to talk about.
Those choices made by her, the big one, of course, is coming to force this weekend, April the 6th, which is the increase in national insurance for employers.
Yeah.
It's not quite clear, having sat through Prime Minister's questions today, you were there too. You're against the NIC's increase, but would you reverse it in power?
So what we're not going to do is to make fiscal commitments of that kind of a scale 4 years ahead of a general election. But what we can confidently say, and be very clear about this, is these are not the choices that we'd have made. So the government said before it came into office, it's going to be about growth, growth, growth. They then came into office, reneged on all the promises that they made on tax, slapped billions of pounds, £25 billion worth of taxes on businesses, talked down the economy with this confected 22 billion black hole that the OBR themselves says they will not legitimise.
About half of it they accept, don't they?
Well, they came up with a figure of around about 9 billion. But they also made the point that actually, had that been known to them at the time, they would have had conversations around that and may well have been a lesser figure. And indeed, look, government departments are very well used to managing down overspends in year. So this is a complete fiction, and Labour should not continue use that
relitigating all that row, but weren't they crystallising commitments that your government had dodged, like infected blood, for example, and the money paid out to postmasters? They brought it all into one pot called £22 billion.
So that, as I say, I think the 3 points on this. One is that when the OBR looked into it, ironically at the government's behest, they concluded that 22 billion figure was a complete fiction. They said they wouldn't, quote, legitimise it. Secondly, they made the point that had there been discussions around that at the time, that figure may well have been reduced. And of course, the point that I'm making is that what would have been potentially remaining could have been managed out in the normal process by way of in-year reductions in spending and so on. So this is a complete... All it was, Chris, was a smokescreen to cover up for the fact that they reneged on the firm commitments they made during the general election, not to put taxes up left, right and centre, not to tax farmers. They told the NFU, eyeball to eyeball, they wouldn't come and make changes to the inheritance.
A year before it happened.
And they did. The winter fuel payments,
Not mentioned.
means they're not mentioned. Business property relief, all of those things, including national insurance increases. And don't take my word for the fact they reneged on this. Paul Johnson at the IFS says on looking at the manifesto.
Well, they're talking about employees, not employers.
Yeah, but no. It says in there in black and white, will not raise national insurance, okay? And what are the consequences of raising national insurance on employers? Well, it's that employees carry the cost. It's workers.
Expected to, not necessarily.
No, no, they will do. The OBR is very clear. It says that going forward, about 76% of the cost of that tax will ultimately be borne by way of lower wages the workers are receiving or increased unemployment. Because ultimately, even though it's the employer that actually pays the money over, it is the employee largely that suffers the consequences. And that was a point that Kemi and I were making in our press conference this week.
Right,
Exactly.
In which you said £3,500 more for
Correct.
a
If you add
the average employee,
that's for the average working household, of which there are around 18
so
million.
2 earners, is that?
Some of them will have 1 earner, some will have 2 earners, some may have 3 earners. But the fact of the matter is that if you take the number of working households and you work out that pass-through of that cost to workers, and you divide it by
that figure.
that is the impact that the OBR derived from the OBR's figures, and it is £3,500 over the forecast period. So that real money,
or 5-year period.
5-year period, correct, over this Parliament. Yeah.
Do you think you got permission to attack this government on its record 8 months in, given the 14 years you had, given the fact that taxes went to a record level, given all the other issues we know about the Liz Truss budget? Let's not relitigate that. But that's what Labour would say. And I just don't think, as an observer, you're apologising enough. I remember when Keir Starmer came in, he spent 18 months saying sorry about Jeremy Corbyn. And I haven't heard a full apology from your government or your team now about that. The record.
Look, things like the mini budget, etc. I was chair of the Treasury Select Committee at the time. I had a lot to say about it before it happened.
You did say about it,
and subsequently. So I'm on the record. Everybody can catch up with my comments on that. But let me make a really important point here, which is that if you look at the kind of tax increases that, yes, were happening under the last Conservative government, albeit that we got some taxes down, actually, that was driven principally by things like COVID, which shrank the UK economy by 10% overnight, and we had to protect jobs. By the Ukraine-Russia war and the inflation that was imported, that had to be brought down.
Energy shock.
We supported the energy shock. We supported people with those cost of living payments that we made. And everybody was actually calling for us to do more than we did, more intervention. Now, that was £400 billion, and that has to be paid back. And that's part of the pressure on taxes.
So that's why they've increased taxes. They were doing it there.
No, Chris, no. Chopper, no. You've got to listen to the whole lesson here, okay? And the second part, Mel's Minute is in full flow. If you look at what's happened under Labour and the fact that the tax burden is now forecast to go up to its highest in history ever, right? That is not because of COVID and things that have happened external to the economy. It's because of the choices that this Chancellor took to come in with this huge taxation of business, talk down the economy, depress the animal spirits, killed growth stone dead, and we've seen the latest forecast, inflate the economy with a big fiscal loosening in the first couple of years of the forecast. That means higher inflation, interest rates being higher for longer, cost more people in their mortgages, but equally, on a large debt pile, means very high debt servicing charges on the actual
the 10-year
we have.
Bonds have gone up.
Yeah, and gilt's going up. So they are responsible. Labour are responsible for that. And that's what blew their headroom. And that is what is now driving up taxes ever higher.
And you think, what the odds you think on tax increases this year in the budget?
Well, I think it's going to be very challenging, because what you've got to do, Chris, is you've got to build a resilient economy with a good amount of headroom that is leaning into growth, that has a tax decisions that are driving growth, okay? You're releasing the animal spirits, getting the businesses going.
They say that.
They didn't. You look at all the PMI business confidence surveys, they were all crashing through the floor because they were talking down the economy. So you have to have a resilient economy, because there are going to be challenges around potentially tariffs, we're about to find out, There will be challenges around some of the assumptions in the OBR's forecast, particularly around productivity, that might be on the optimistic side. A requirement to spend more on defence in the short to medium term, potentially. So a number of factors here that could be coming our way. But some of them you can't do anything about. But what you can control is building a strong, resilient economy. And Labour have failed on that. And we may be about to see the consequences of that as we come up to the autumn
Do you
budget.
think a recession? I mean, if we get a bit.
Well, I'm not going to start. I'm not going to start getting
pull the economy down. All that.
projecting forward for that. They often say that astrologers are there to make economists look good. You know, when it comes to forecasting.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into that business, but other than to say we are really in a rather fragile state at the moment, and that is of the Chancellor's making.
We've grabbed you straight after PMQs on a Wednesday afternoon. Speaking ahead of 9 p.m. Wednesday night, we expect tariffs to be imposed on the UK and other allies and other countries by this government. You ran to be leader of the party. In fact, we last spoke in this studio when you were the leader.
Seems a long time ago.
Yes,
a long time ago.
You were wearing the more casual in all
With the kids.
You were down with it. You were a campaigning politician then. How would you deal with Trump if you were leader now?
So the most important thing you can do is to try and get a carve out from the tariffs that are about to be announced. And if you do that, you've got to firstly have the right relationship. Well, look at what Labour did. They said a lot of daft things about Trump and the administration before he became president, which soured the relationship. You secondly need to get into the room as early as you can. Well, the first meeting, they were 5 months in before there was a meeting between our business secretary and his opposite.
But that's not fair. They have to, because they couldn't. You can't, as a UK minister, speak to anyone in the transition team until they're in place.
There are all sorts of conversations that can go on.
We were told they couldn't do that.
Well, the reality is, I think that the government has been slow off the mark. They look at Crawford Faulkner, one of our great experts on trade and tariffs and all that kind of stuff.
He's gone, isn't he, now?
They got rid of him. You look at the Karen Pierce, who was our last previous ambassador to Washington, was removed and replaced by a political appointee. If you add all those things up, they do not amount to the most effective approach to trying to avoid those kind of tariffs.
Do you think Chagos?
Let's see what happens.
Was Chagos the Chagos discussions a distraction? Was a big issue tariffs?
Well, I think the Chagos discussions were discussions that should never have happened in the first place.
Your government started, of course.
We were very clear. Whatever was happening under our government, we were not going to end up in a position where we were going to be leasing back at vast expense, unknown expense, because the government hasn't been transparent, in order to retain for a period of time
the cost of
that base.
That wasn't your policy. That was Labour brought that.
Well,
did they? Or because you two, James Tavish started the talks.
Chris, we would never ever have been in a position where we were leasing back something that is ours, the Chagos Islands, in order to maintain.
It does make no sense.
Diego Garcia on it. It makes absolutely no sense, and it appears it will be billions of pounds, which would be better spent, for example, on our armed forces.
Probably announced as they announced cuts in the spending review in June, which will be very, very difficult for the unprotected department.
Well, it's going to be very difficult in June. But look, let's be clear why it's going to be so difficult in June. Part of that is very poor growth in the economy, which is something that they have created. The second thing is actually blowing all that headroom that the Chancellor had back in the autumn and more. That had to be rebuilt, okay? And that was rebuilt by taking further, including botching and rushing welfare reform.
Well, going to into the weeds, aren't they being honest about these fiscal rules? Your government had a 5-year rolling target, which meant that you could just basically always push forward the 5-year period when you had to hit those targets. You never actually had to say, we've hit this target. She's doing it within this parliament, which is to her credit, isn't it?
No, right. So if you want to get a bit,
Well,
you picked a fight with the wrong person on the fiscal rules. Let me explain. No, let me explain. It is still at the moment a 5-year target. There is.
It won't roll forward.
It'll move forward year by year a little bit to being a 3-year target, but it is basically currently still a 5-year rolling target. What she did was she weakened the fiscal rules. So we had something called public sector net debt, which was the debt rule, and she's replaced it with public sector net financial liabilities.
That's right.
Which includes all sorts of other things.
Worked in there.
Which means that you get much more headroom. It's less of a check on expenditure. And in fact, if she was operating to the rules that we operated to, and you see it and the OBR identify this, she's actually going back. You want increasing debt.
Pensions that the other areas.
Well, no, public sector net financial liability includes illiquid financial liabilities, such as the student loan book and things like that. But all you need to know, and your listeners need to know, is that if she'd operated under our more stringent fiscal rules, she would be way underwater in terms of the amount of debt. But she changed the rules and she made them looser, and she's just about reaching them currently, having
until these
broken them back in the autumn.
Kemi Faye, not your leader, is backing the government on not doing retaliatory tariffs. Is that right? You're your position. Why don't you be opposing the government on these?
Well, I think we have to recognise that as Conservatives, we are free traders. It's in our DNA. That's what helps grow the whole economy and makes everybody better off. It's one of the great drivers of the reduction in world poverty, for example, has been trade and free trade. I think you need to ultimately look at what is announced, what particular aspects of the tariffs are, how you might react to that. I mean, interestingly, if we do get a carve-out, you could be in a position where tariffs are applied by the United States to other parts of the world. They reciprocate. We don't reciprocate. And actually, we get cheaper goods as a result of trade diversion. You'd have to worry then about dumping and protecting our domestic market. But nonetheless, potentially lower prices coming, whilst being able to export into the United States without that tariff barrier that our competitors overseas are facing. So there is one scenario in which it's not so bad, but the others are very painful. So whether we retaliate or not, if we're on the business of having tariffs applied to us, think of cars, machinery, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, all the things that we sell in great scale to the United States, it will be very painful. But this brings me back to the government. It is the government's duty to have got in the room in the most effective way and spared us from that. And I don't believe that they played it the best way possible.
Are you surprised, by the way, Labour has stolen some of your party's clothes, slashing aid, increasing spending on defence, cutting the civil service, or saying they're going to cut the civil service, cutting benefits, they say, by $5 billion by the end of this decade, looking at maybe offshore processing for illegal migrants? They're doing all the things you were going to do had you won a fifth term.
No, I don't accept that. So let's take welfare, for example. What they've done is because Rachel Reeves ran out of money and suddenly said, help, I need you to make some cuts. The DWP ran around and cobbled something together, went for the easy levers, okay, didn't save as much as they could have done if they had taken a more deep, measured and thoughtful approach to principled welfare reform, and have come up with something I think will be deeply damaging to many vulnerable people up and down the country. We had already brought in reforms when we were in government, and we had consulted on further reforms that would have been a more fundamental overhaul of benefits like personal independence payment, which would have done, yes, but that would have achieved two things this government has not done. One, it would have been fairer on people, and secondly, it would have raised much more by way of savings. So they've got the worst of both worlds. They've got a halfway house on savings, and they botched it by rushing around, and a lot of people will pay the consequences of that.
That's the welfare side. Other areas, though, too, are listed them there, cutting the aid budget, civil service.
Well, the cutting the aid budget and putting it in for defence was, well, the aid budget to defence was what we were saying before they even got round to thinking about it. They followed what we were pressing.
They're moving to the centre middle ground, aren't they? Leaving with you politically less space to go.
Well, no, but how can you say they're going to the centre ground when they're destroying the economy and livelihoods and business? It's totally unconservative, okay, to think that you can tax and spend your way to a vibrant, growing economy. We know, Chopper, you know, and I've been in business. I set up my own business from scratch many years ago, and I know what it takes to do it. You need a government that keeps taxes down. You need a government that reduces legislation and creates that environment so that you can thrive. That is deeply conservative, deeply conservative. There's nothing conservative about what this government's doing to the economy.
The approach on net migration seems sensible, but the numbers are still big, aren't they? I mean,
300,000
by average getting here.
They're still large. The reason why they're coming down actually is because of the changes to the visa regime that we brought in when we were in office, and that's radically reducing the number of
that's the family members mainly
coming to dependents and.
Just as a step back, it is a podcast, so I can't grill you all the time about policy, although I'm loving doing it.
Yeah,
Rachel Reeves, what do you make of her?
Well, as a person,
yes,
I have nothing but warm feelings towards Rachel. I've met with her. I wouldn't say socially, but we have met up for a quick chat in the sidelines, as it were. It was very pleasant. It was some some weeks ago or a month or so ago. No. I think we were meant to have a cup of tea, but she was a little bit late because she'd been doing something else. So we ended up, I think, skipping the tea. But we did have
standing meeting where you sat down?
No, I sat down on a sofa, and I think she sat down on an armchair. And we had a chat, and it was perfectly friendly. And I think that's important because I think in politics, being able to divide between, there are things you can disagree on when it comes to policy and politics, of course, and you must vigorously defend your position and hold the opposition to account, whoever they may be. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and so yeah, it was a nice meeting.
Do you like this Rachel from accounts line?
No, I don't particularly.
No, I think it's a bit sexist, don't you think?
I wouldn't. I'm not going to opine on what it is and what it isn't.
What it like?
I think. I just think I personally my kind of politics I think tends to be a little bit less personalised. I'm more interested in tackling the things that people are doing or not doing, or the way they're doing things. But look, it's for others to decide what they do and the language they use and so on.
Yes.
But you've asked me the direct question: is that something that I'm attracted to? Then there's not something that I've tended to.
She's someone who just wasn't quite clear about her history before she's an MP, was she? That's interesting, isn't it? Why is that?
You're trying to draw me in for now being rotten to Rachel, aren't you? On a things. Yeah, but I realise that. I know that it's only you, your mum, and a couple of others that listen to this. About listen. Yeah, don't mind me. Yeah.
Well, why? You're
loving
it out there.
I'm not chopper. I'm not going to get drawn into sort of muckraking around anybody or whatever you like to, or however you like to describe it. I think I'd probably leave it at that. What really matters to people up and down the country is really what the government is doing, and we know they're destroying jobs, they're destroying lives.
I hope you should vote for this stuff. Okay,
what they didn't get what they voted for. Well, you just now. You ask farmers. Hold on, Chopper. If you ask farmers, did you get what you expected? You ask pensioners. There are 12 million of them. Did you get what you expected? You ask business people struggling around our high streets, okay, who have now got this national insurance rise, did they get what they expected? The answer is a deafening no, I'm afraid.
And that group's growing, I think. The farmers issue, I think they were caught. I've just got a feeling, I think, that the politicians were caught out by an offer from the Treasury to make some money and close a loophole to attack millionaires, but they hadn't quite walked through what would happen here with family farms. I'm not sure they knew what they were getting into, frankly.
It's an age-old idea that gets dusted off every time a new minister goes in. And any minister that's got any nous takes one look at it and says, no, I don't think that one works. And it goes back in the drawer for the next person to come through. Exactly. On this occasion, they, for some reason, said, oh, that's a great idea. Look, wealthy people. We've got about 10,000 millionaires up to billionaires, whatever they are, leave the country since Labour came to office. The tax that those people were paying will require 1/3 people working at the average wage to pay the same amount of tax. So I'm afraid that this Labour obsession with going after people that are creating wealth, creating jobs, creating the profits that pay the tax, that pay for the public services, that are there as a hallmark of a civilized society, is just completely wrong. And I'm afraid it is really having the opposite effect to the one that was. Do you know what Kemi and I and others are going to do? We're going to come up with a plan, and it will take time, and it should take time, because it needs thinking through, where people are not running away from our country because they're worried about being fleeced by the taxman at every turn. They're kicking the door down to try and get into our country, be part of that enterprise culture.
To do it, Mel Stride.
Right. This is new leadership.
That's what they're showing.
It's new leadership. We have the same opportunity, for example, that Margaret Thatcher had from 1975 when she became leader, and all the great work that she did over months and years. It wasn't done in 5 minutes, to really come up with a radical way to move the economy.
What's your plan?
Society.
What's your plan?
Well, I can't start setting out lots of tax policy now, but let me just quickly can through the things that I do think are important. We've got to get growth and productivity at least back to the kind of trend level it was on before the great financial crisis. If we'd done that and just carried on at that rate, the economy would be 25% bigger than it is today. Was there a couple of percent or thereabouts, right? Okay, we're running at about
times growth this year.
Yeah, between half and whatever. But it's substantially down. So the prize is huge if you can do it. What drives that? Well, tax policy is definitely part of it. Getting the tax burden down is absolutely essential. Looking at a complete overhaul of the tax system, such as it relentlessly incentivizes and leans into employment and growth. You've got to get the size of the state down and more efficient? How have we had 365,000 civil servants before the pandemic rising to 515,000 now? That just does not add up. We need to look at skills. We need to look at higher education, getting the skills mix, particularly as we bring down net migration so that we've got the people domestically to do that work. We've got to reform welfare in a major way to make very significant savings to the cost of welfare. And we've got to do a lot of supply side things, getting energy costs down. We're paying 4 times what they pay in the United States for energy. We've got to look at those roads, the railways, the reservoirs, all these big projects, got to get those moving quickly, housing and much more. So what I'm saying, Chopper, is this is not a 5-minute job. This is a huge job. But if we're patient and we do the hard yards over the next months and years, we can come up with a platform that will revolutionise
2 or 3 years
the economy. Well, I think you'll see it in stages, actually. I think there are things that we'll be able to say at different points along the route. But what I can assure you is we will have the right plan for our country in time for the manifesto at the next general election. People will be very clear on our principles and our vision in the meantime. And there will be a number of policy-related statements that we will make right across the piece as we approach.
Do you have time with reform biting at your heels? Do you have that time?
We have to recognise that the general election is 4 to 4.5 years away. And the polls will bounce around. There was one out actually this morning, I think more in Common, that shows us now taking the lead. Yeah, okay. And a few percent. Yeah, but we are nonetheless in the lead. But you know, we mustn't get sidetracked by those kind of polls bouncing around in that way. We've got to firstly earn that hearing from the electorate. That means being an effective opposition, but it also means demonstrating that we get the challenges that the country faces and we're doing the deep, thoughtful thinking to come up with the solution.
My worry is that
and we will get a hearing through time. We'll get more of a hearing, but understandably, it's difficult to get a hearing after that kind of an election result and the verdict of the country at that time.
Chopper podcast this week.
You could swing a few percent on the polls, Chopper, after this.
My worry is that your leader says, I'm in a marathon, not a sprint. But I think she's a marathon runner in a sprint. And I wonder whether you've got the time. I think there's a crisis coming probably June next year. When Reform might win in Wales, win 2 or 3 MSPs in Scotland, and it's 2 years up in the election, and the party will say, just do a deal with Farage, bring her right together.
Well, I don't think it should be any deal with Farage. We made that clear. Look, it's going to be bumpy, okay? Look, when we had those last local election results in 2021, it was on the back of the vaccine bounce. We won over 60% of the seats we contested. Nothing like that is going to happen. It's going to be much more difficult. And Wales and Scotland in 26 may equally be different. But let me put it one other way to you, Chris. If I was a socialist on your podcast now, and it was 2019, you would be saying to me, your party has suffered its greatest defeat since the 1930s, Mel. You know, you're going to be out of power for a generation, aren't you? Okay, well, look what happened. We can do it. It's a very volatile situation out there, but if we stay true to our principles as Conservatives, do the hard work, and we're an effective opposition, I really believe that we can do this.
Just finally, before you go, how will we judge your success as Shadow Chancellor?
So I think holding Rachel to account, and I think you saw that last week in the Commons when I was up against her and going out on the media and explaining, as I have done on your podcast, both what this government is getting wrong, but also talking thoughtfully about the important things that we as Conservatives should be doing in the area of the economy. I believe some of the polling even now is showing that people do actually now trust us more on the economy or living standards and so on than Labour. We need to see more of that. So holding the government to account and doing that hard work so that we come up with an economic policy that's going to allow us to face into the challenges that we have. Geopolitical challenges abroad and more defence, an ageing population at home that's going to need support through social care, an intergenerational challenge. How do we reach out to young people and give them a part of our economy? You know, maybe in the way in which when you and I were younger, I'd hate to suggest you're my age yet, Chopper, who knows, but you know what I mean. We got on the housing ladder, yeah? And in my case, I set up a business from scratch, and Nigel Lawson cut my taxes, and red tape was being cut as well. And you could, as a young person, then be excited about being part of this UK project, you know? That's what we've got to get back.
Feels like it's missing. Just finally, have you watched his adolescence programme?
No. But I feel I have, because I've heard a lot about it. Okay, no, I haven't had time. Yes, it's a very, very serious issue. Totally. And I mean, I have youngish daughters, And of course, when you look at online things, that's deeply worrying in part. And I think to some degree, you look at mental health outcomes for 16 to 24-year-olds. I think a lot of that can be traced to social media.
Yeah.
Well, we ran around in the woods and played cowboys and Indians and things, whatever we did, I don't know.
Mel Stride,
More innocent days.
thanks for joining us today on Chopper's
Great pleasure.
Political Podcast. And thank you for listening wherever you are to this podcast. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Mel Stride tweets at
Mel J Stride at Mel J Stride, aren't I? I'm looking. You see, you said Jane nerd. Brilliant.
James is
He
fine.
even knows my tweet address. You see.
Email me, chopper at gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, Mel Stride has, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else to help other people find this show. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind it, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh, the guiding minds, and the worker bees, Rebecca Nunes and Jordan Millen, who never stop working, live with me in this dungeon most of our lives. Thank you for listening to them and to you at home. If you want more Chopper in your life, please do tell your friends, of course, and catch up with me during the week on GB News and at midday when I give my analysis on PMQs and scoops for the week and my analysis of 2. And keep up to date with our best reporting on our website, of course, gbnews.com. But for me and Mel Stride, cheerio!